Appreciate it. Thank you very much. Yeah, good. We've got Kyle Day coming up here. Going to be talking about something that has become a problem in the last few years. Back when my grandfather was keeping bees, the issues that Kyle is going to talk about didn't exist. So there are some things that cause you some headaches with bees, definitely. So Kyle, I'm going to turn it over to you. This is Kyle Day. I mentioned him earlier. He's secretary of the Missouri State Beekeepers Association, and also one of our past State Association of Honey Ambassadors and one of our scholarship students. So Kyle, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Alrighty, thanks, Philip. I kind of edited this a little bit because Eric talked about some stuff, so we may have a little bit more time for questions at the end. So pests and diseases, what Bill George calls the doom and gloom of every bee class. Basically, some of the things we're going to highlight today is integrated pest management, critters, varmints, and vandals, small hive beetles, the Varroa mite, and brood diseases. So integrated pest management is basically a way of measuring and making pest or disease management decisions. It's inclusive of all treatments and management options, starting with the least intrusive to the most intrusive options. Basically, your naturals all the way up to your hard chemicals. And then the decisions are based on your observations, your measurements, not guesswork. And then they have a pyramid that you get to kind of decide on what you want to do with. So in the pyramid, you got your cultural, which is your genetics. This is going to be site location, your hygienics, different genetics that beekeepers are working on. Then you got your physical, which is going to be your traps, your barriers, screen bottom boards, brood breaks, different things that you can do to help physically with the bees. Biological, this is going to be parasites, predators, other pathogens that help get rid of pests. And then you get to your chemical, and you start with your soft or organic chemicals, and then you can go up to your synthetics and harsh chemicals. So genetics, queen and drones are mostly what you're looking for in genetics. They make different kind of genetic variations, like your Varroa sensitive hygienes. A lot of people will call survival stock the genetics. Like I know Stuart talked, or Eric said something about Stuart Deeds earlier. I believe Stuart's treatment free. He has survival stock going from early 1990s, I believe. And then you have like your Purdue ankle biters and different genetics variations from different colleges and research labs. And then your cultural. This is basically your management styles. Locate your hives in the sun. That helps a lot with small hive beetles. Disrupt brood cycles. You can cage or requeen. Make splits. This is basically giving your hive a period where the queen isn't reproducing larvae, and then that causes the mites not to be able to reproduce. So this allows for a brood break and helps with your Varroa mite levels. Low stress, and then reducing robbing and drifting. Mechanical, this is going to be your screen bottom boards, sticky boards, which if you don't know what those are basically a board that you can put underneath a screen bottom board to allow the mites or whatever falls through the screen to get stuck on this board. And then you can smash and trap beetles. You have unscented Swiffer sheets. A lot of people will put those on top of the top bars of your top box, and the beetles will actually get stuck in that. And then you can have drone brood removal, comb replacement, and powdered sugar dustings. Here's a video of, you can see this Varroa mite on drone brood. So basically how the Varroa mite reproduces is they go inside the cell with the larva and the pupa, and they'll actually lay their eggs. And while they're laying eggs, the mites will actually grow with the pupa. And then if you haven't ever seen, most people actually haven't seen this. This is a male Varroa mite. For some reason, the male's exoskeleton isn't as dark colored as the female's. And then you have your biological control. This is going to be beneficial insects, pathogens, nematodes, and fungus. This is a Situ scorpion. This was in bee culture, and these actually feed on the Varroa mite. And then you have your chemical options. Basically, this is going to be your last option. Like many people, label is a law. Whatever the label says, you want to do correctly, just so you're not misusing chemicals. When you're misusing chemicals, that's what helps the mites get more resistant to those chemicals. And a lot of people suggest you rotate chemicals just so your mites don't get used to them. So your first line of defense is going to be your soft or your organic chemicals. This includes formic acid, thymol, oxalic acid, and hopguard. And then your second line is going to be your synthetic chemicals, which are miticides, which don't have an organic breakdown. That includes majority anything else on the market. So what does the IPM require? I mean, it basically requires education. You have to know your enemy, your records. You have to know what's going on in your hive, what reasons you need to treat, why you should treat, and then your intentional management. How are you managing your hives to avoid these pests and diseases? You need to evaluate your strategies. Are they effective? Are you doing different things to help kind of fight against mites all season long, and you get to early August and you do a mite test and see you still have to treat? What can you do differently the next year before you would have to treat? Of course, were you satisfied with your results? And then did the pest population exceed the threshold? Any side effects? And then what can you plan for the future? So basically, IPM is a way of life. IPM will be practiced differently between each beekeeper. I know some beekeepers are treatment free and have great success every year. I have others who loses almost all their bees every year. So you have to basically evaluate, modify, listen to science, and be willing to try new methods that work for you in your bee yard. And a great time to talk with other beekeepers about what they're doing is at meetings and conferences all around the state. So the Varroa Destructor mite. One thing, this is the only thing I ever send people to Webipedia for, is they have a pretty good summary of the Varroa Destructor. Basically, this migrated on Asian bees in 1986. It transmits over 18 known bee diseases, and they're pretty sure there's multiple more that they don't know about yet. Comes along with viruses, just as the form wing virus. And can kill colonies usually faster in the fall and winter due to the population size. So here are some pictures. There's also a lot of good YouTube videos on the life cycle of the Varroa mites. And then here's basically the life cycle. So like I said, the female goes inside the cell of a 5-year-old larva. She also lays eggs in there. The eggs feed on the fat bodies of the mites, or the mites feed on the fat bodies of the larva and the pupa while they develop. And then once the bee hatches, so do the mites. And like Eric talked about, your mite population rises with your bees, but when your bees population starts to fall, that's where the mite population is the highest, and that's what helps cause crashes in beehives. So sampling methods, like Eric talked about, a lot of people use the alcohol method because that's the most accurate. Then you have the sugar roll method, which is favored because it doesn't kill the bees, but it also doesn't give you a very positive, accurate sample. A lot of people say if you do a sugar roll, you'll have to add 2 to 3% onto whatever your infestation rate is. Brood examination, you can pull a drone comb. The drone comb is larger, so a lot of mites will lay their eggs in the drone comb. Then you can do a natural mite fall or a sticky board. That's labor intensive and inaccurate. Right now, the main infection rate sample for a lot of the bigger universities and different bee organizations are they saying anything over 9 mites in a 300 bee sample or 3% needs preventative measure or treatment. Some beekeepers say 1%, some say 5%. So 3% is kind of right in the middle of that. And then, like we talked earlier, you have your different Varroa treatments. You have your miticides, your alternative, and your cultural options. The miticides, there's commercial varieties. It's the most toxic. Mites do develop resistance to those, so you need to rotate different chemicals. Sometimes if you don't use them properly or you use them when the temperatures are too high, depending on the type of treatment, it can contaminate your comb and your pollen. So like I said before, the labels, the law, you need to watch what those labels say with those miticides. Then you have your alternatives. Your formic acid is effective but dangerous in liquid form. With your oxalic acids, you must wear respirators. That's like your vaporization. That can actually get into your lungs and be very deadly. Your essential oils, as far as I know, none of those have actually been cleared for treating mites. A lot of people say they work. They're less toxic, but can mask bee pheromones and interfere with hive communication, and that can cause a lot of problems. And I know some people who have tried essential oils, and it's actually they used so much of it that scent masks your queen pheromones, and they try to requeen the hive. So your Varroa treatments, like I said, oxalic acid, there's 3 kind of different treatment types. Only 2 are approved. There's a drench method. The solution is applied directly into the hives. There's a vapor treatment. Like I said, wear your respirator. You can inhale that. It can be very dangerous. And then there's the Randy Oliver shop towel method. It was pending approval. It's not effective. It has long exposure period to acid to the mites. And I believe he stopped that research because it was ineffective. Then you have your small hive beetles. This is one of the newest pests. Of course, it again came from South Saharan Africa, where they are in almost all the colonies, but do little damage and generally are not considered a serious pest. They first came to the United States in 1998. Now in 30 plus states, probably just about all 50 states. They're usually come out of the southeast and they migrate with beekeepers and packages as they travel for pollination or sales. And then the adult beetles can fly several miles at a time. So here is your small hive beetle on the top right. It has the black shell. You can often see the legs and antennas tucked underneath the shell if you look at the back of it. And then here at the bottom, this is what happens if you give your hives too much space and they cannot control the hive beetles. That is hive beetle larva. That will actually feed on the wax, pollen, and honey in the hive before it goes outside the hive to pupate in mud and dirt. So treatment, prevention is the best treatment. There's a combination of different controls you can use. Of course, like anything, keep your colonies healthy and strong. Minimize the space they can hide in or your bee space. Don't put too many boxes on at one time. In the fall, don't leave too many boxes on. Make sure there's no holes in the side of your boxes or your frames that they can hide in. And then use caution when combining colonies or moving frames. If you're moving frames to a weak colony and that frame has a lot of small hive beetles on it, can be overwhelming to that weak colony. Of course, avoid tossing bird comb on the ground near hives. Keep a clean apiary and honey house. They don't like the sun, so full sun for placement of hives really helps. Your good woodenware. Debris on the bottom board can give the larva a good place to pupate in the hive. Clean your screen, clean or use screen bottom boards. When you're pulling honey, extract honey within 1 or 2 days of pulling it. And then keep your cappings in sealed containers. And then remove your excess supers and reduce patrol for bees. Too much space can be a big problem. Preventative and treatments, again, traps and Swiffer sheets. There's many different traps on the market, most of them using oil or a powder to drown or dehydrate the beetles. A lot of people will just use cooking oil or pickling lime. And then your unscented Swiffer sheets can go on the top bars and entangle the bees. Make sure they're unscented and chemical free, of course. Then some companies started making what they call beetle bars. This basically goes between your screen bottom board and your top or your bottom brood box, and that basically doesn't allow the beetles to get into your hives unless they fly. And then some screen bottom boards or Freeman boards also have a pan that you can use for oil or powders to attempt to trap the larvae and adults when they fall through the bottom of the hive. And then you have wax moths. You have your greater wax moth, which is considered old world, and it's migrated with the host bees. In the wild, they are beneficiary for cleaning out old nest cavities, including the disease spores. The larva is considered an excellent fish bait. This is usually a secondary problem. Wax moths will not kill out a hive. This is kind of an indication your hive was already weakened and that the wax moths just came in to kind of clean it up. So if you have a wax moth problem in a hive, you actually need to ask yourself, why was that hive weak enough to be invaded? And then here's pictures of the wax moth. Your top right picture, that top larva is your wax moth larva, and then your bottom picture is your small hive beetle larva, just to kind of compare the different sizes of the larva. The bottom left picture is the wax moth fully grown. And then the bottom right picture is what the wax moth larva will actually do to your comb. They'll go into your hives and eat through the comb and then leave that web. And then here's what they can do to your boxes and woodenware when they're pupating. They actually kind of bore into the wood to make their cocoons. So they can really damage woodenware quickly if you're not being careful. So how do you control wax moths? Use strong colonies, store comb in cold or freeze empty combs for at least 24 hours to kill any wax moth eggs. Extract your hives, extract your supers pretty quickly and then store them properly. There is a product called Paramoth, or the scientific name is right there. Not mothballs. That's the scientific name. I usually remember what type of paramoth to use by a scientific name. If it starts with a P, you can use it. If it starts with the N, you cannot. Once you use paramoth, you need to vent your boxes for at least a couple days before adding them back on the next season. Then, of course, keep your bottom boards free of debris. And then you can store brood combs if it's been exposed to 24-hour light. Wax moths don't like light, so anytime you can store those in light, it will not attract wax moths. Foul broods, there's two different foul broods. There's the American, which is spore-forming bacterium, and then there's the European, which is bacterial, and it's a stress disease. And then you have your trog brood, your fungal, which is fungal, and then your sac brood, which is viral. So American foul broods is pretty rare today. Spores can be viable for 80 years. So usually if there is a American foul brood outbreak, it's because someone found some old equipment out in a barn and they started to use it. So just be careful about where you're sourcing your equipment from and your frames from. If it's equipment that's been sitting in a barn for many years and they don't know why their bees died, I would be wary of using that. The only recommended treatment for American foul brood is to burn all effective equipment, including the bees. And then how to identify that, it's the punctured sunken caps, and then dried propolis on the cell tops. That's called what you do a rope test. And here's a sample of American foul brood. Like I said, it's very uncommon. And then other brood diseases, your European, which is bacterial and generally seasonal. It usually clears up with the warm and drier weather. You see that common in the spring when it's real wet. Your chalk and sac brood, not common and generally not identified. Anytime you have anything with brood problems, requeening is considered highly recommended. Of course, there's many different books and stuff you can read on this that shows pictures. It's uncommon, so I don't have many. But if you have any problems that you think with this, call an expert beekeeper, find someone in the club that they can help come look at it with you. Nosema, there's two types of nosema. The common name is basically bee diarrhea. It's when there's an imbalance of gut bacteria. This usually happens in early spring when the bees haven't been flying for a while. Once the weather warms up and they have a good couple days to fly, this usually clears up the problems. But they do offer what they call Fumagellin B, which is a treatment/feed supplement that works on the lesser of the two strains. And then here's a picture of nosema. Again, it's just kind of bee diarrhea, which you'll see this in the spring. The first couple of days, your bees get to fly out of winter. And then you have your apiary pests. You have your skunks, your raccoons, your mice, livestock, and vandals. So your skunks, they will actually come up to the hive and eat the guard bees and suck the juices from them, leaving behind little wads resembling chewing tobacco, like you can see in the top right corner. Basically, how to figure out if you have a skunk problem is finding these wads, and then you can see scratches in front of the hives. If your bees are pretty angry every time you go in to look for them, and you see these, and then you can use deterrents, traps. I know some people will take a old roofing shingle and put some nails through it and put right there at the front of their hive. Bears, generally not a problem. Kind of becoming increasing in south central Missouri, or if anyone knows about Bruno who traveled through. Like livestock, just use high voltage electric fences to keep them away. Mice will enter the hive when night temperatures get below 45 degrees. Basically, they're just looking for a warm place to nest. They will cause hive and frame damage. Bees won't reuse that area. They'll actually leave it behind and not use it. The best way to prevent mice from coming into your hives is use entrance reducers. There's many different kinds, between wood ones to actually different types of metal entrance guards in the wintertime. Make sure mice, of course, aren't in the hive when you're adding that entrance reducer or protector. And what do you do if you have problems? Research. There's many different websites, books, and different things that can help you figure out what problems you may have. And then you can call other beekeepers, mentors, local beekeepers within our club, local suppliers, and then club leadership can even help you find something. And then, of course, fix the problem ASAP. So basically, a general summary: keep your hive strong and healthy. is the leading recommendation through any research. Take your losses in the fall. Of course, your hive placement needs to be in full sun and limited space, less area for the bees to patrol, clean. Basically, you need to balance space with the colony expansion depending on the season. And then the screen bottom boards are beneficial for several pests. Basically, with your pests and diseases, we could talk about those all day long. There's many different options for those. Everyone's going to have a different option. So just talk with other beekeepers and pick how hard you want to treat with those. And I believe we have some time for questions, right, Phil?
Yes, we do. I was kind of looking at the list here. Some of the folks have asked questions and some have been answered already. I think if I've seen anything that hasn't been answered. I'd leave the room for a minute. Did you talk about critters?
Yes, I did.
At once. Yeah. And I was one thing, Connie and them and Diane mentioned one. They're kind of critters, but did you talk about livestock? Normally, you don't think about them as being pests.
I did a little bit. Basically, anything with livestock, especially like cattle, like to rub up against hives. So if you're putting hives in like a cattle pasture, it's best to put a fence around them.
Yeah. And did you happen to talk about black bears?
I did a little bit. I mean, there's not really in our area so much a problem with black bears, but really the only way you can keep them out is going to be your electric fences.
Yeah. I thought maybe, like I said, I apologize for that. I'm trying to do two things at once here.
Oh, you're fine.
No problem. Anybody have any other questions? One was a general, does anyone like using a pollen collector? I guess it's not directly to you, but some of our members, I know they collect pollen and sell it. Is there a case for doing preventive treatment for mites at some point in the year? That's a good question. What's your thoughts, Kyle?
So kind of like what Eric talked, I usually suggest beekeepers, check for mites 2 to 3 times a year, usually right before you put your supers on and right after. And then some people like to do it right when they come out of spring. You don't want to do just a blanket treatment for that because that's how the mites kind of become resistant to different miticides. So you definitely want to at least do an alcohol wash or a sugar roll to at least see what your mite levels are. And then based on those levels is when you need to treat.
Yeah, there is only one drawback with using the testing is if you're planning on treating, say, with oxalic acid in January, February when the weather's cold. It's kind of hard to open up the hive and start dumping bees out and gathering up 300 bees to test. There's a question, what does soft organic mean?
So basically they have, it's either soft or hard chemicals. Basically your soft chemicals are going to be your more organic treatments like your oxalic acid and your formic acid, and then your hard chemicals are going to be those actual synthetic chemicals that aren't broken down over nature.
Okay, that hopefully that answers that. Yeah, one nice thing about the oxalic acid and the formic acid, I don't know if I've seen anything about them actually building up a resistance to that, like the hard ones.
Yeah, I don't think I've seen any research anyways on them building resistance to oxalic acid.
Yeah. Here's one. When you say full sun, can you set the hive on the outside of the border of trees where the trees are on the east side? We need to have no trees around. I don't know if that's to you or not.
Basically, when I say full sun, I either want it to be 3 to 4 hours of sun in the morning, or 3 to 4 hours of sun in the afternoon. Is kind of what I see has been best for to help deter small hive beetles.
I can tell you from my experience, I've got some that are close to some trees. Trouble is they're shaded in the morning, so they don't get warmed up real in the morning, and that's the ones I've had the most trouble with, the small hive beetles. And the Millard boys, they got to experience with my hives what happens with small hive beetles take over. They got to see the best of times and the worst of times. They saw what happens, what a hive looks like when you have a queen that fails and the numbers get down to the small hive beetle take over. It is a mess, wasn't it, boys? Yeah, it is slimy. It is a nasty thing. Yeah. So, yeah, okay. Treatment without testing. I think that's what we're talking about. Yeah, there was there's probably two schools of thought. Kyle's right that you really want to test it all possible. Interesting thing is, if you do the testing, you find you've got mites in one of the hives. I know for the formic acid, they say if you've got mites in one of your hives there in your apiary, you treat all your hives. And that sounds like a good idea, but I also have to remember they're the ones selling the treatment too. So I think you just kind of have to decide on your own. It's treatment of mites and the small hive beetles have become a real problem, unfortunately. Any other questions for Kyle before we go on? We've got one topic left. That's the one that it's kind of a sweet topic that people are always looking forward to.